Good evening and good to have you with us on this edition of the Urban Debate. Viewers, even as we continue with our focus on coronavirus, a battle that each state has to fight right now, unfortunately, the Rajasthan state government is more busy saving its own government. And as the crisis, the turmoil within the Congress party, especially in Rajasthan, intensifies, tonight we're going to start off this edition of Urban Debate by focusing and talking a little bit more about it. Earlier in the day, a sensational series of comments were made by Ashok Gehlot. In many ways, the gloves are off. Chief Minister Ashok Gehlot, who till now was in many ways tolerating Sachin Pilot as his deputy, now has very interesting things to say about Sachin Pilot, calling him Nikamma, Nakara, and that everybody knew he was of no use, but because of his good looks and good English speaking skills and whatever support he has from the media, he got along and he came so far. Now, there was also a big set of developments in the courts, in the Rajasthan High Court, where this battle is being fought between the Congress and we're going to get you all of those details. But first up, I actually want to play out what Chief Minister Ashok Gehlot said.
10-12 साल के गेम में आप सब कुछ बन गए, ऐसा बहुत कम होता लोगों को मिलता है। उसके बाद में जिस रूप में उन्होंने खेल खेला वो बहुत दुर्भाग्यपूर्ण है, बहुत दुर्भाग्यपूर्ण है। किसी को यकीन नहीं होता था कि ये व्यक्ति ये काम कर सकता है। मासूम चेहरा, हिंदी इंग्लिश में अच्छी कमांड बोलने की, मीडिया को इम्प्रेस कर रखा पूरे कंट्री के अंदर। हम जानते थे कि निकम्मा है, नाकारा है, कुछ काम नहीं कर रहा है, खाली लोगों को लड़वा रहा है। वो व्यक्ति कांग्रेस की पीठ के अंदर छुरा भोंक के जाने के लिए तैयार हो जाए। ये जो खेल अभी हुआ है ये 10 मार्च को होता। हरीश सालवे जी लंदन से किसके वकील है? कॉर्पोरेट हाउसेस के वकील बने हैं। इनकी फीस कितनी होती है? एक पेशी की 50 लाख होती है, 40 लाख होती है, 30 लाख होती है। वो लोग हैं ये। दूसरे वकील कौन है? कौन वकील दूसरे? मुकुल रोहतगी साहब, अटॉर्नी जनरल ऑफ इंडिया और बीजेपी के खास चहेते, वो खड़े हैं यहाँ पे। उनकी फीस भी 50-40 लाख है। ये पैसा कहाँ से आ रहा है? क्या पायलट साहब ये से दे रहे हैं पैसा?
Well, there you heard it, what Ashok Gehlot had to say, not mincing his words at all, going all out after Sachin Pilot, even raising questions about who's really funding this entire rebellion, who's paying for these lawyers, who's paying for the MLAs who are hiding out in one resort or the other, while of course the party is taking care of the Congress MLAs who are on side of the Gehlot camp. What about the others? That's not all. Of course, in the courtroom also Congress made some very strong points saying that all the actions of the 19 rebel MLAs have to be perceived as saying anti-party activities, and they've pretty much just left the party. Why else will they make such critical comments and behave in such manner? The fight essentially in Rajasthan High Court right now is about the Speaker's actions and whether the Speaker has the power to look at disqualification of MLAs basis what has happened. The Sachin Pilot's camp claims that until unless somebody has crossed the floor, somebody has cross-voted, you cannot be disqualifying them simply for and within the party fight that's going on. That case continues, has been adjourned for the day and will come up for hearing tomorrow. Hopefully tomorrow evening we'll see the High Court take a decision. But here is the other aspect which is actually unfolded on the political side, and that's these audio tapes that got leaked and have now become the center of the fight between the Congress party and the BJP, and of course within the Congress itself. Now these are 3 audio clips that have been leaked, that are out in public domain now, allegedly with people involved from the Sachin Pilot camp. These conversations refer to a plot to topple the state government in Rajasthan. The conversations are about buying off MLAs and plotting further. Now, there is no verification that has been done, no authentication so far about whether they are genuine. If not, Where did they come from? Who put them out there? And if they are genuine, are they really the voices of those that the parties claim they are? Yet the political war of words continues. Congress says that one of the voices there is of Union Minister Shekhawat and that Gajendra Singh Shekhawat should tender in his resignation. Congress also alleges that the clips have the audio of their rebel MLA Bhavar Lal Sharma. Of course, a criminal case has been registered and the Special Operations Group of the Rajasthan Police is doing the investigation. But the BJP has some very interesting points that they have raised. And here is what BJP says. Was phone tapping done officially? BJP spokesperson and leaders are actually asking the question that assuming that these phones were tapped and these clips are there, was the process followed? Did the government compromise the privacy of people by doing this tapping without following the due procedure, without taking the due permissions? Did the Home Ministry know about it? Because the Home Ministry itself has now sought the details of these audio clips from the Rajasthan government. So what really happened here? That's one of the things I'm going to be asking our panelists as we talk about the Congress versus BJP fight that's going on in Rajasthan. Let's say good evening to Pawan Khera, spokesperson for the Congress party, Tuhin Sinha of the BJP, Neerja Chaudhary, senior journalist, and Professor Ranjan Mahan, senior journalist, joining us from Jaipur as well. In fact, let me start off with Mr. Khera. Mr. Pawan Khera, at the heart of this entire debate are these clips. Now, the big question that the BJP is asking, was due permission taken for this kind of a phone tapping?
Now, I find this question by the BJP an admission of guilt, a rather shameless admission of guilt. That we got caught red-handed stealing is not what they're worried about. The fact that we got caught, who caught us? Was the act of catching us legitimate? Was the tapping legal? These are questions that a guilty person is asking. What is more worrying? What is more worrying is that senior leaders of the BJP, in this case, a minister of the Union Cabinet, is heard openly talking about buying MLAs. Instead of worrying about that, they're saying, "Aapne hamara phone legally tapped kiya ya illegally tapped kiya." This, to me, and to anybody with an iota of common sense, would be an admission of guilt. Period. And Tanvi, you said at the heart of the entire issue is these tapes. No, that's not the heart. At the heart of the entire issue is the fact that these MLAs, along with Mr. Sachin Pilot, are taking the hospitality of the BJP. They're using lawyers close to the BJP, identified with the BJP. Who's complaining about tapping? Not the MLAs whose voices we've heard. Not a single Congress person is talking about tapping. It's the BJP. So we know who's the guilty party here. At the heart of it is the fact that despite Corona, despite the fact that there is a serious crisis of Corona and the economic fallout of Corona, they have not shown any seriousness about battling the actual issues, whether it's on the borders of the country, whether it's Corona within the country. Look at what they did in Madhya Pradesh. I mean, if they had not wasted their energy toppling a duly elected government of Madhya Pradesh, they would have focused more on how to deal with Corona. But that's not their priority. So at the heart of the entire issue is the misplaced priorities of Mr. Modi and Mr. Shah.
But Mr. Khera, you still haven't answered the question that they're raising, whether permission was taken for this kind of a phone tapping.
First, they have to answer our questions. And for that, they'll have to give voice samples. Is this voice Mr. Gajendra Singh Shekhawat's voice? I mean, I'm from Rajasthan, I know whose voice it is. Let them come out clean. Why are they trying to protect those two MLAs whose voices we can hear on the tapes? When the SOG reached Manesar, why were these MLAs not allowed to give voice samples? What are they running scared of? How did the tapes come into being? It was all over the social media. Even before the tapes came in, Ranjan Mahan ji is from Rajasthan. Ask him, everybody who was in journalism or in politics in Rajasthan knew there's something happening. There was a buzz with possibility of some audio tapes. So, you're talking about these tapes. I'll take you to another set of tapes. Two smugglers were currently in custody in Rajasthan. They also happen to be BJP leaders. No, I can't help it if smugglers are BJP leaders. And in some other investigation, their phones were getting tapped legally. Why were they discussing selling and buying of MLAs? Why are they not discussing? Why is the BJP not talking about those tapes, which were legitimately done of two smugglers who also happen to be BJP leaders? Some strange coincidence. Let them talk about that. I asked them. Let's have a debate also on those tapes.
Let me get Tuhin Sinha to respond to these questions that you've raised. Tuhin Sinha, go ahead, please.
Well, Tanvi, first of all, let me thank you for repeatedly playing out Ashok Gehlot's venomous, acrimonious comments against his deputy. The words that he has uttered today, nikamma, nakara, and whatnot. And just last week, he had clearly mentioned that the CM and the deputy CM had not been in touch or had not been talking to each other for the last 18 months. So in the first place, the audio tapes which have been released are a desperate act of, it's a desperate and a contrived and convoluted attempt to distort and to, the actual incidents, the way incidents have taken place, and to salvage the reputation of the Congress party. So you can't compare it with any other phone tapping incident, because clearly over here, after the comments made by the CM, repeated comments, and the venomous comments made by the CM, it's an internal war between the Congress members. And Congress, mind you, Rashid Kidwai, a Congress loyalist, has himself been on record to say that Congress has broken 49 times because of the ambition of its leaders. So why do you want to drag the BJP into it? When we demand a CBI investigation, we are within our rights because we want to authenticate the tapes. The very first step towards authentication of those tapes is to know whether SOPs were followed, who did it. Why should the Congress have a problem in answering that? So I think, instead of deflecting attention from its own inability to keep its flock together because of the more pro-China videos which Rahul Gandhi brings out, I'm sure there will be problems in other states as well. So you should take care of that rather than, put the onus on the BJP.
Well, Tuhin Sinha, I never thought that you're going to start with your opening comments by trying to, in a way, defend Sachin Pilot or point out what Ashok Gehlot has to say about his former deputy. But that being said, again, by asking for process details, whether process was followed, whether these phone tappings are legit, whether privacy was really, compromised, isn't the BJP then admitting that there may be merit to these tapes?
No, in the first place, we are absolutely sure that these tapes are doctored. So we are putting the onus on the Congress government in Rajasthan to establish its authenticity. And the very first step that you would do to establish its authenticity would be to tell us in what circumstances they were tapped, whether SOPs were followed, whether it was authorized by the government or a private party. So I don't see any reason why the Congress should have a problem in answering those questions, because those questions would be the basis to establish whether at all those tapes are authentic.
Mr. Ranjan Mahan, do you agree when Congress says that by raising questions about the legitimacy of the tapping and privacy, BJP is actually admitting that there is truth to these audio clippings and the entire plot?
Well, Tanvi, the truth, as is often said, is not as black and white as we'd like to see. It's always, there are all kinds of shades of grey. And I find that both parties are not addressing some issues and more busy, playing politics over these audio clips. Essentially, while the Congress wants to dodge how they procured these tapes, the BJP on the other side is not so much bothered about the content and whether those leaders of their own party who supposedly have been, who allegedly were a part of those tapes and seem to be discussing some not such savory things, whether that person is deeply involved in this whole crisis. So while the Congress wants to dodge the whole question of whether standard procedures were followed, whether what exactly was the method through which they gained, through which they got hold of these tapes, the BJP on the other side is simply not willing to tell us why for instance, the Rajasthan police was not allowed immediate access of the resort where Sachin Pilot's supporting MLAs are staying, how the Rajasthan police was, made to wait for a long time. Excuse me. And in the meanwhile, the MLAs seem to have slipped out of that resort where they were, continuing to stay for more than a week. Suddenly they all disappeared from there. Similarly, if these voices, if the authenticity of the tape is something that bothers the BJP, they should in fact be coaxing both the Congress MLAs who are whose voices are heard on this allegedly, and also the union minister ought to come out voluntarily and give a voice sample rather than dodging the whole issue, because the authenticity of the tapes can only be established through voice samples, and none of the three politicians involved are simply making themselves available. The two Congress MLAs have mysteriously disappeared. We don't know where exactly they are staying. And as far as the union minister is concerned, while it's true that he came out on day one itself and said that, all of this is just a farce, this is not his voice at all, etc. Now, in a country where we've always lauded a minister like Lal Bahadur Shastri, who on the, on one single accident in the Indian Railways, immediately resigned. So when in a country where the moral principles that politicians earlier were following were of this higher standard, and the BJP itself has always lauded those standards, for their minister to actually be named in an FIR and yet not come forward and try and give the voice samples also raises a whole set of questions and doubts. Tanvi?
Okay. Yes, fair enough. I take your points. In fact, Nija Chaudhary, let me ask you this question then. Who should be investigating this audio tapes case now? Should it be the Rajasthan government? Should it be the CBI?
Look, both sides have made different demands. The fight is now at three levels. One is in the legal realm with the court and the speakers, whether the speaker can come with what kind of a verdict the speaker will come out with on disqualification. So that fight is going to go on. Number two is the technical one. The Congress says that the BJP people offered bribes, and they named Mr. Gajendra Shekhawat as being one of them, a union minister. And the BJP has hit back saying, let the CBI look into this whole matter on how the government of Rajasthan did it without following procedures, or what procedures they followed, and whether they violated the law of privacy. So that is at a technical level. The third level where the fight has gone today is the Chief Minister of Rajasthan, the gloves coming off there and sharpening his attack against his former Deputy Chief Minister, Sachin Pilot. I mean, to use words like nikamma, nakara. The Chief Minister has, fought back very well. Unlike the usual Congress spirit, they give in very easily. And Madhya Pradesh, the government went. Of course, it was a difficult situation. But the Chief Minister of Rajasthan has really fought well. It's a spirit of the Congress that you did not expect to save his government. But to now, use words like these, for a person who is very measured with his words, very savvy, very measured with his words, came as a little bit of a surprise today, to use personal allegation, personal charge like this. So I think the fight has become very, very, very messy, and I think we will see more of it. And I think overall, probably the Chief Minister wants to create conditions that any patch-up with Sachin Pilot becomes an impossibility. The High Command is, Priyanka Vadra is supposed to be in touch with Sachin Pilot, but if this kind of a fight goes on, in the coming hours and days, it will become very difficult for any chance at a patch up.
No, Mr. Pawan Khera, this is pretty clear, isn't it? After what Mr. Ashok Gehlot has said, any return of Sachin Pilot has completely now been ruled out.
Tanvi, what Mr. Gehlot has said, and I agree with Nirja Chaudhary, Mr. Gehlot normally doesn't talk like this. Why was he forced to talk like this? Now, there is something hurting him. We are all hurt. I mean, I'm very, very frank and upright with you when I say I am hurt with what Sachin has done. I am absolutely hurt with what Jyotiraditya Scindia did. So, if a man, a senior leader like Mr. Ashok Gehlot, who's seen enough ups and downs in his career, if he's so deeply hurt, I mean, I expect him to be absolutely upright about what he's going through. And I'm glad he's doing that. We are not like RSS or BJP. We are absolutely, any vibrant organization will have these upheavals, will have these differences. These differences will also come out. We don't have to hide these differences. There are differences, fine, there are differences. After all, these people keep accusing us, "Arey, aap yahan to democracy nahi hai." We know what kind of the pain of Mr. Advani. How would you know the pain unless he speaks? The pain of Murli Manohar Joshi. I mean, you go and talk to them off record, you get to know the pain. But then, fine, that's a different organization. It's absolutely moribund. It's regimental. Nobody's allowed to speak out of turn. Fair enough. Welcome to their organization. Our organization, if we're feeling so upset about something, and I think Mr. Gehlot has voiced the angst of a lot of people in his own way. Of course, different people will have a different way of expressing their angst, but Mr. Gehlot is feeling upset, and rightly so.
But Mr. Gehlot is not talking about how upset he is or hurt or betrayed he feels. He is simply dismissing everything that Sachin Pilot seems to have done so far, completely writing him off as a politician.
Tanvi, as I said, different people will have different expression to articulate their angst. This is the way Mr. Gehlot wants to articulate his angst. I mean, so be it. He is a senior leader. He has every right to articulate what he's feeling. So I don't think we should read too much into it.
Okay.
I don't think we should stop him from uttering these words. It's up to him, totally up to him. I mean, I will have a different way of expressing my angst with what's
okay. Nirja Chaudhary wants to make a point.
Yeah. You know, I would also, I just want to respond to Pawan is saying. Yes, I understand the pain of Mr. Gehlot. I understand his desire to save his government. But what about the pain of Sachin Pilot, who says I was constantly marginalized? And he worked very hard. We all have seen it. For 5 years, he worked very, very hard to put the party back on its feet. Now, he became Deputy Chief Minister. That's fine. Mr. Gehlot at that time outmaneuvered him. He's much more savvy. But I would say, so what about I understand the pain and angst of the congressman that Pawan is talking about. What about the angst of all those in the country who are watching this spectacle and the possibility of another opposition and Congress government falling? What about their angst? What about the angst of 120 million people who voted for the Congress even in 2019? And why is it that the leadership of the Congress party, knowing for the last 6 months that this was going on, that this may be on the cards, why did they not intervene to somehow sort things out? That is the central question that the Congress party is not answering. What about our angst? People who want a strong opposition. You have to, and what about the angst of Sachin Pilot, the young in the Congress party who are feeling suffocated? Why was that not addressed?
With Tanvi's permission, may I respond to what Nirja ji has to say? Tanvi,
yes,
there are two aspects to what Nirja Chaudhary ji said. The angst of Sachin Pilot, let's come to that first. There is a system, there is a mechanism in every party. Our party's mechanism is how many MLAs support the candidature of one person. In this case, there was a CLP. MLAs wanted Mr. Gehlot, just as MLAs wanted Mr. Kamal Nath in Madhya Pradesh. The system was followed. If the central leadership had overruled what the MLAs wanted in Rajasthan, Nirja Chaudhary ji and Tanvi Shukla and Ranjan Mahan would have accused us of, oh, there's no democracy. How can you overrule what the MLAs want? So if we do what the MLAs want, Nirja Chaudhary ji is saying, what about the angst of Sachin Pilot? Nirja ji, you have seen more politics than I have. So I must tell you, I'm sure you'll agree with me, and Ranjan Mahan ji will also agree with me. In politics, you have to create a space for yourself. You have to protect your turf, expand your turf, struggle for survival, fight every step. Within the party also, Sachin Pilot, nobody stopped him from increasing the numbers. I mean, he could have easily worked hard and got the support of the MLAs also in December 2018 when the CLP was being consulted about who should be the Chief Minister. So if the numbers are with Mr. Gehlot, the central leadership has to go by that. So these are systems in our party. The next question of Nirja Chaudhary ji was that why
Ranjan Mahan.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead. Finish your point, Mr. Khera.
Why didn't the central leadership intervene? Because this was festering for a year or so. Again, I bring you back to the systems in the party. Every party has its own systems. We have a coordination committee which was absolutely fairly well represented by all sides, including, and there's a bridge called the General Secretary in charge, who is a bridge between the central leadership and the state leadership. There are mechanisms in play. All those mechanisms, when they fail, then comes the role of the central leadership. In this case, Mr. Randeep Surjewala and Ajay Makanji were sent as central observers who are still there. And we've made public appeals to all these MLAs. We don't do things surreptitiously like my friend Tuhin Sinha's party does. We don't threaten people. If you dissent, you won't be able to go for a morning walk. That's not our culture. So Sachin Pilot can still go for a morning walk tomorrow, just as the other MLAs can. In their party, there is a different culture. There is a different management skill. We don't have that skill, and we are very proud of the fact that we don't have that Haren Pandya skill. We don't want that kind of a skill.
Well, I know Tuhin wants to make a point, but Mr. Ranjan Mahan also wanted to say something. Mr. Mahan, let me ask you this question first. Do you buy this argument that Sachin Pilot should have waited? Sachin Pilot didn't have the numbers, Gehlot did, and so the central leadership had to go with him. Why was Sachin Pilot in such a hurry?
Well, I would tend to agree with this assessment. Please remember that Sachin Pilot is somebody who's got everything. He became, I still remember covering him when he was such a young person, I think just around 26 when he became the MP from Dausa. Then he was promoted as a minister in the Manmohan Singh government. Then quickly was, once they lost power in Rajasthan, he was brought in as the party chief. And then at barely 40, he was already deputy chief minister. So unlike Jyotiraditya, who actually was virtually powerless, Sachin Pilot was in a much better position in Rajasthan. He wasn't powerless, as some are trying to suggest. And I think, what Mr. Gehlot said today actually reflects to me his complete sort of frustration with the way he's been treated. A few days ago, he mentioned how Sachin was not even on talking terms with him, and that tells you how deep is the rift between the two of them. And I think it's very, very sad. You know, a lot of people I've been talking to, they all keep saying, you know, their emotions are ranging between sadness and anger, because the Congress, in a certain sense, is squandering the mandate that they got in Rajasthan less than 2 years ago. But at the same time, what this reflects is that for Mr. Gehlot now, it's definitely a fight to the finish with Sachin Pilot, and he's clearly putting on some pressure for the party's high command not to have any kind of compromise formula with Sachin Pilot, who, as he said today, was sitting as the PCC chief, was a deputy chief minister of the state, and yet was hobnobbing with the opposition party to try and topple his own government. That, I mean, you know, if you have some sense of political morality, there is a Lakshman Rekha beyond which personal fights, personal feuds should not be, carried forward. So I think somewhere there is, despite affection, fondness, liking, and realization that, yes, Sachin Pilot, you know, if you look at the dilemma for the Congress High Command, you realize that what they do know is that Ashok Gehlot is the present, and at the same time, Sachin Pilot is the future for the Congress in Rajasthan. It's the future that they've nurtured over the last decade and a half in Rajasthan, and he's been given all important positions in the state that could possibly have been given to him, except the chief ministerial chair. And for that, we must remember, and I think I totally agree with Pawan Khera, because if the majority of MLAs are favoring Ashok Gehlot, on what logic can you bring in Sachin Pilot as the chief minister? As we all know, he doesn't have even 20 MLAs today out of the 107 that the Congress has, which means an overwhelming 80% of the MLAs actually favor Gehlot. So how can the party's top brass try and dislodge him simply because Sachin doesn't wish to see him as chief minister and wants himself to get into that chair?
Okay, point taken. If he doesn't have the support, how can he even ask for chief ministerial post if he doesn't even have the support within his own camp of MLAs? I get that point. Sorry, I'm interrupting, but I'm a little short on time. So quickly a comment from Tuhin Sinha as well on this. Go ahead, Tuhin.
I really don't know how many private conversations my friend Mr. Pawan Khera has had with Mr. Advani and Dr. Murli Manohar Joshi for him to keep dragging them into all his debates. But at least I have met Mr. Advani after the Ayodhya ruling in November, as recently as November last year, and he was perfectly happy with the way things were being carried out in the country. On the contrary, we know for a fact how Sitaram Kesri has been treated by the Congress and how PV Narasimha Rao has been treated. So I think the Congress should focus on putting its house in order even now.
Please talk about Haren Pandya also, Tuhin. I mean, I also took the name of Haren Pandya. Don't miss that.
Gehlot and Mr. Pilot clearly established that it's an internal war. The BJP has nothing to do with it. So please don't concoct some audio tapes just to, deflect attention from your internal failures. Your own tedious and painstaking explanation on what went wrong in Rajasthan once again establishes that we have nothing to do with it. So, your doctored audio tapes will be of no avail.
He forgot to talk about the morning walk episode.
As much as I agree with you that, it is a Congress problem and the fact that two people within the Congress began to fight, of course, nobody will believe that BJP is not taking advantage of it, and justifiably so, which a rival party and opposition party will not do. So I'm completely out of time. Thank you to all four of you for joining us on this conversation. Like Nirja Chaudhary pointed out, viewers, this battle is being fought on multiple fronts now. One in the Rajasthan High Court, two, of course, in front of the cameras, the fight that's going on and the way it's panning out, and the three, these audio tapes and the investigation that gets carried out there. It's the fate of the Gehlot government that hangs in balance. It's also the fate of Sachin Pilot, which way he is going to go next, and a larger set of questions about whether or not the speaker has the powers to really disqualify MLAs who've now joined the Sachin Pilot camp. We'll keep you posted on all of those stories and developments. Time for a very quick break. On the other side, the big development, not only has India started its human trials for the COVID vaccine today, but there is a big step forward even in Oxford's research. We're going to get you all of those updates, and our experts will help you understand what that means. So stay with me. Has written to state governments asking them to ramp up the testing for coronavirus. It's a clear instruction that has gone out not just by the ICMR but also by the government. It's the Union Health Secretary Preeti Sudan and ICMR DG Dr. Bhargava who've written to the states asking them to ramp up testing capacity. Viewers, this has been a point we've repeatedly raised here on Mirror Now of how India is not testing enough. We still don't have enough testing capacity, and that continues to be something that the states also need to look at. If you don't test enough, you will never know what the true picture is and what the true extent of COVID infection is. And here is the central government and the ICMR asking the states to buck up.